She doesn't belong in this level of math. That's what someone whispered the day Amara Thompson corrected her calculus professor in front of 200 stunned students. But what started as a moment of quiet defiance soon ignited a battle of intellect, pride and power, one that would play out not just in a classroom, but on a national stage. How did a quiet black girl in a hoodie end up outperforming PhD candidates and rewriting what the system thought it knew about genius? As Malcolm X once said, the most disrespected person in America is the black woman. Amara didn't just prove them wrong, she made them rethink the whole equation. If you think talent has a look, a voice, or a zip code, you're about to learn otherwise. If this story challenged you, moved you, or made you think twice, leave us a comment and don't forget to subscribe. We've got more stories like this, and they matter now, more than ever. The first snow of the season had dusted the sidewalks of the University of Wisconsin campus, and inside a towering lecture hall, students shuffled in with steaming coffee cups and oversized backpacks. Most took their usual seats, heads already buried in their laptops or murmuring about the brutal midterm that had just passed. It was an early Monday morning in Professor Ronald Blake's advanced calculus class, infamous for its complexity, and even more so for the man who taught it. Professor Blake was already at the front of the room, scribbling equations on the massive blackboard with his usual sharp, deliberate strokes. Tall, square-shouldered, and always dressed in a blazer and tie, he projected an air of precision and authority, but beneath that polished exterior was a reputation few dared to challenge. Blake didn't just teach math, he dominated the room, and if you fell behind, he didn't offer a hand. He let you sink. At the very back, tucked near the far right corner of the auditorium, sat Amara Thompson, a quiet, observant 19-year-old black girl who rarely spoke unless called on. Her glasses slid down the bridge of her nose as she flipped through a notebook filled with careful, color-coded annotations. She wore the same gray hoodie she always did, her braids tied back neatly and her sneakers scuffed from years of use. She didn't look like a math prodigy, and that's exactly why most people ignored her. Blake turned to face the class, his voice cutting through the chatter. Last week, we reviewed double integrals. Today, we move forward. Laplace transforms. If you're already lost, now's the time to transfer out. A few nervous chuckles trickled through the room. Blake began working through a complex example, filling the board with terms and limits. Pens scratched, fingers tapped keyboards, but Amara's eyes narrowed. Something about the second line of the transformation didn't sit right. A sign error. Minor, but it changed the outcome. She hesitated. Was it worth mentioning? In this room? Under that gaze? Then a boy in the second row raised his hand. Professor, I think there might be a mistake in that second step. Blake turned, his face already unreadable. A mistake? He echoed. He looked at the board, paused for a beat, then gave a tight smile. There is no mistake. Let's continue. The boy sank in his seat. A few students exchanged smirks. Amara exhaled slowly. She couldn't stand it. The way people like Blake dismissed others, especially students who didn't look or sound like him. Before she could stop herself, her hand went up. Actually, she said quietly but firmly, there is a mistake. You carried the coefficient incorrectly in the transformation. It throws off the integral. The room fell into stunned silence. Blake turned slowly, his jaw tight. Miss Thompson, Amara Thompson. Well, Miss Thompson, he said, crossing his arms, why don't you come show the class where I went wrong? He was daring her to choke, to trip over herself, to reinforce the very assumptions he'd already made. Amara stood, adjusting her hoodie. Her hands didn't shake. She walked to the front, took the chalk, and without fanfare, rewrote the second line. She pointed, then spoke. Right here, the coefficient stays inside until after the transformation. If you carry it out too early, you alter the bounds of the integral. Blake stood motionless. So did the rest of the class. He stepped forward, examined the board, then a flicker, barely visible, a twitch of his brow. He nodded once. Fine, you corrected it. No apology, no praise. Amara turned and returned to her seat, head held high. But the room was no longer the same. Whispers, side glances. The hoodie-wearing girl in the back wasn't invisible anymore. Professor Blake picked up the chalk again. "Let's move on," he said briskly. "Since Miss Thompson is clearly so eager to contribute, I'll offer her another chance, a more advanced challenge." A murmur passed through the room. This time, Blake filled the board with a problem even graduate students would struggle with. It was aggressive, sprawling, and cruelly timed. Amara looked at it and didn't blink, because something inside her had changed too. She was done being silent. The problem on the board was a beast, spanning nearly 6 feet across the black surface, littered with nested integrals, differential operators, and obscure notations that most undergrads had only seen in passing. Retsufe capped the marker with a smug twist and turned back to the room. "This," he announced, "is from a graduate-level qualifying exam. I don't expect it to be solved by anyone here. But since Miss Thompson appears to enjoy correcting professors, let's see how far she gets." Laughter scattered across the room, nervous, uncertain, a bit cruel. Amara didn't react. She stood slowly, brushed a fleck of lint from her sleeve, and walked to the front again. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the tile. Blake stepped aside, folding his arms, as if preparing to watch her unravel. She picked up the chalk. Then she paused. That moment, those few seconds of silence, wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Her eyes moved quickly across the equation, her mind already dissecting each term, each transformation. This wasn't just numbers. This was a language. And she was fluent. The room grew quiet again. Students leaned forward, sensing something was different. Amara's hand moved deliberately, rewriting the first segment with precision. She didn't explain as she worked, not at first. The room didn't deserve a lecture yet. They needed to see it first. She moved to the next segment, then the next, and then she spoke, calmly, without emotion. "You applied the boundary conditions too early here. That shifts the solution space. It's a common trap when you're solving it for speed, not accuracy." Blake's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened. By the halfway point, students had stopped pretending to take notes, eyes locked on the board, on her. Even the ones who'd laughed earlier now sat in stunned silence. Amara reached the final segment, stepped back, and set the chalk down. Her work was clean, almost beautiful in its symmetry. She turned toward Blake but didn't say a word. Silence stretched. One student whispered, "She did it." Another followed with a soft, "No way." Blake stepped forward, scanning each line, like a man searching for a crack in the foundation. He traced her steps mentally, eyes darting, lips moving without sound, but there was nothing to tear down. Every calculation was sound, every assumption valid. He didn't say, "Well done." He didn't nod. Instead, he said, "Sit down." Amara returned to her seat as if nothing had happened. But something had. Everyone felt it. The air was different now, charged, uncertain, alive. A few students glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Others stared, openly impressed, confused, threatened. Blake turned back to the board and began erasing it in hard, angry swipes. He resumed the lecture, but his tone had shifted, less commanding, more mechanical. He rattled off formulas without the usual fire. His posture, once upright and immovable, now carried a stiffness, like a man forced to share the stage. Amara sat silently, her face unreadable, but inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about being seen. Finally, the bell rang, but no one moved at first. As students slowly packed up, some looked toward her, their faces softened by a mixture of awe and discomfort. One girl from the front row gave her a small nod before slipping out. A guy in a varsity hoodie muttered "damn" under his breath. Blake remained at the front, pretending to organize papers, but his eyes followed her as she walked out. Amara stepped into the cold air outside, her breath visible in the crisp morning sun, Her phone buzzed. A text from her mom. "How was class today?" She stared at it for a second, then typed, "Different." Because it was. She had walked into that classroom invisible. Now she wasn't. The next class began with a tension that could be sliced with a blade. Students filed in quietly, casting side glances toward the back corner where Amara usually sat. She had become something of a legend in just 48 hours. People whispered her name in the hallways, shared grainy photos of her work on the board, debated whether what she did was luck, brilliance, or both. But Amara didn't seem fazed. She walked in wearing the same gray hoodie, her backpack slung low, headphones around her neck. She sat, opened her notebook, and waited. No eye contact, no reactions. Professor Blake entered 2 minutes late. Unusual for him. He said nothing, as he set his briefcase on the desk and uncapped a marker. His jaw was tight. He didn't greet the class. He simply turned to the whiteboard and began writing. The problem that took shape was monstrous. "This," he said finally, "is a real problem taken from the National Mathematics Symposium, graduate level. Since some of you seem eager for academic challenge, let's indulge that curiosity." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. The board filled with triple integrals, vector fields, a nonlinear differential system nested in a Laplace domain. There were audible groans from the front row. "Take-home challenge," Blake added dryly. "Due next week, unless someone feels compelled to solve it now." A few heads turned toward Amara. She didn't move. Blake let the silence stretch before starting the day's lecture. But something in his tone had changed. Forced, slightly bitter. He moved too quickly through examples. His patience wore thinner with every question. At one point, when a student misapplied a theorem, he snapped, "If you're going to guess, at least guess quietly." Students exchanged awkward looks. No one laughed. Midway through class, Amara raised her hand. The room stiffened. Blake hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like to attempt the problem," she said, her voice calm. Blake blinked. "Now?" She nodded. He stepped aside, not speaking, just uncapping a fresh marker and offering it to her. She walked to the board, slow but steady. The room leaned forward, as if pulled by a gravitational shift. Amara scanned the equation again, then began. Her hand moved with confidence. She simplified the innermost function first, breaking down the vector transformation step by step. She narrated just enough to keep the class with her, but not so much that it sounded like boasting. 10 minutes in, you could have heard a pin drop. 15 minutes in, even Blake had stepped closer, arms crossed tightly, watching every line. When she reached the final simplification, she paused, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted it to land. She underlined the final result and turned back to the class. It was correct, completely undeniably correct. For a moment, no one said a word. Then someone clapped. One sharp solo clap from the back. Another followed, then a few more, until the entire room was applauding, not out of politeness, out of shock, out of respect. Blake held up his hand, and the room quieted. His face was unreadable. "You've skipped a step in the partial decomposition," he said tightly. Amara didn't flinch. "I did it mentally," she replied. "I can show it, if you'd like." Blake was silent. Then, barely audible, "No, that won't be necessary." She nodded, handed the marker back, and walked to her seat. But she didn't sit right away. She turned back to him. "You don't have to like me," she said, her voice low but clear. "You don't even have to believe in me. But if you're going to challenge me, do it because I'm a student who wants to learn, not because I make you uncomfortable." Then she sat. The air in the room was charged, uncertain. Blake stood frozen, then slowly turned back to the board. "We'll resume with Fourier series next class," he muttered. Class ended early that day. As students left, many glanced at Amara, some with admiration, others with curiosity. One or two gave a small nod, the kind that said, "You've changed something." Amara stayed a moment longer, packing her things carefully. Blake didn't look at her as she left. But he didn't erase the board either. 2 days later, Amara received a formal email from the university's math department. The subject line read, "Invitation to represent UW at the Midwest Collegiate Mathematics Symposium." Her stomach flipped. She hadn't applied. She hadn't even heard of it. The email was short, clinical, and unsigned. Just a note that she'd been nominated, personally, by Professor Ronald Blake. She stared at the screen in disbelief. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a trap. The symposium was infamous. 3 rounds of high-pressure math challenges, watched by professors, researchers, and scouts from top graduate programs. It wasn't just about solving problems. It was about doing it fast, dirty lights, with an audience. Blake was trying to set her up. If she failed, it wouldn't just humble her. It would erase everything she'd proven in the classroom. She almost declined. Her finger hovered over the reply button, but then she remembered the stares. The silence after she spoke up. The way Blake couldn't even say, "Good job." He wanted her to crumble under pressure. She wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, she replied with 2 words, "I accept." Over the next 3 weeks, Amara changed her routine completely. Her social life, what little she had, disappeared. She spent nights in the university library, surrounded by advanced textbooks, competition archives, and half-drunk bottles of water. She solved proofs on the back of diner napkins. She watched recordings of past symposiums, studying body language, pacing, how people cracked under pressure. She trained like it was war. One evening, as she sat alone, scribbling across a whiteboard in the empty honors lounge, someone walked in. It was Marcus Lynn, a senior and the last student from UW to ever place in the top 5 of the symposium. He was known on campus as the calculus kid, even though he hadn't competed in over a year. "I heard you're competing," he said, sliding his hands into his pockets. Amara didn't look up. "I am. You know Blake's only putting you in this to see you fail, right?" She paused, then nodded. "I know." Marcus stepped closer, scanning the board. "You've got the right idea here, but you're overcomplicating the Jacobian. Watch." He picked up a marker and in 10 seconds, rewrote an entire line she'd been stuck on. Amara blinked. "You training alone?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Yeah, not anymore." From that night forward, Marcus helped her sharpen everything, not just her math, but her timing, her strategy, even her breathing. They drilled under fake time limits. He challenged her with problems that felt unsolvable. He pushed her to think aloud, to stay composed, to own the stage. "You're not just solving," he said once. "You're performing." By the time the symposium weekend arrived, Amara felt like a different person. The competition was held in Chicago, inside a sleek conference hall filled with name tags, blinking monitors, and an air of unspoken pressure. Students from MIT, Stanford, Northwestern, all buzzed with confidence, entourages of professors trailing behind them. Amara arrived alone. She wore her usual hoodie and jeans, no team jacket, no prep school swagger. She was the underdog, and everyone knew it. Blake spotted her from across the room. He offered a nod. No smile, no encouragement. She nodded back. That was all she needed. Round 1. Rapid mental math. Amara flew through it, her fingers tapping on the tablet interface faster than most could read the questions. Round 2. Theoretical proofs. She nailed each one, blending intuition with clean logic. By the time round 3 began, open problem solving on a digital board in front of an audience, only 3 names remained on the leaderboard. One of them was hers. The final question appeared on the screen, a monstrous hybrid of calculus, abstract algebra, and systems theory. Gasps rippled through the audience. Amara closed her eyes. This was it. She picked up the stylus and started writing. Calm, clear, unshaken. Somewhere in the crowd, Blake leaned forward. She didn't stumble, didn't panic. She performed. 20 minutes later, she circled her final answer, stepped back, and lowered the stylus. A pause, then thunderous applause. She didn't need to look at the scoreboard. She knew. She'd won. The morning after the symposium, Amara sat alone in the campus coffee shop, her medal resting in the side pocket of her backpack. Outside, the first signs of spring pushed against the cold, a few brave bobs on the trees, rays of sunlight warming the pavement. But inside, she was still processing everything. She hadn't checked her phone yet. There were over 200 unread messages. Her inbox had exploded overnight with emails from math departments, invitations to research labs, and even an early offer from a Stanford graduate. She sipped her coffee slowly. It wasn't about the attention. It never had been. Across campus, in a conference room filled with faculty, Professor Blake stood at the head of a long oak table. The math department chair had called a meeting that morning. She didn't just win, the chair said, scrolling through the official results on his tablet. She scored the highest recorded composite in the last 6 years, beating out 2 doctoral candidates. A few professors exchanged glances. Blake said nothing. One of the younger adjuncts leaned forward. You said she was unprepared, that she lacked discipline. Blake's jaw flexed. She made me reevaluate that, he said finally. The chair looked at him. Ronald, this program's reputation benefits when we recognize talent early and foster it. You nominated her, you challenged her, and she rose beyond every expectation. Blake gave a small, forced nod. Back in the coffee shop, Amara finally opened her messages. One in particular stood out, a reply from her mother, who'd finally seen the university's social media post the night before. The photo showed Amara standing in front of the giant symposium scoreboard, arms crossed, face calm, as her name sat at the very top. The message read, I always knew, but now they know too. Amara smiled. Later that afternoon, she returned to campus to collect some books. As she walked through the math building, students stopped her, some shyly, some with unfiltered excitement. A few asked if she'd tutor them. One girl whispered, You're the reason I didn't drop out. She wasn't used to this. The stares before had been judgmental, dismissive. Now they were full of respect. She rounded the corner toward her old lecture hall and found Professor Blake standing outside, speaking to another faculty member. He noticed her immediately. The hallway went quiet. He took a step forward, nodding slightly. Miss Thompson? He said. Professor, I trust you've seen the results? I have. He hesitated. You did. Exceptionally well. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't empty either. Thank you, she replied. Blake shifted awkwardly. The department's putting together a recommendation package for graduate programs. We'd like to include you. I'd like that, she said. Another pause. Do you plan to pursue theoretical research? I plan to change things, she said simply. He didn't ask what she meant. Somehow he understood. She walked past him, her steps light, her shoulders tall. This wasn't about one class anymore, or one competition. It was bigger than that. She had cracked the code, not just in math, but in perception, in power, in being seen. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast golden light across campus, Amara returned to the honors lounge, the same room where she'd first met Marcus. He was already there, reclining in a chair with a laptop on his knees. Told you you'd crush it, he said without looking up. She tossed her backpack on the table. You did more than tell me. You trained me. He grinned. What now? NASA? MIT? World domination? She shrugged. I don't know yet, but I'm not hiding anymore. He raised his coffee cup in salute. To not hiding. She clinked her water bottle against it. And for the first time in her life, Amara Thompson felt exactly where she belonged. Sometimes, the quietest voice in the room holds the greatest truth. Amara's story reminds us that brilliance often hides behind humility, and that courage isn't always loud. It takes guts to stand tall in a space that wasn't built for you. As Maya Angelou once said, I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. In a world that often overlooks young black women, Amara didn't just solve equations, she rewrote expectations. Her victory wasn't just academic, it was symbolic of every person who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told to stay in their place. So if you've ever felt invisible, let this be your spark. Keep showing up. Keep proving them wrong. If this story moved you like it moved us, go ahead, drop a comment, share your thoughts, or even tell your own story. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. We don't just tell stories, we tell your stories. Let's keep lifting voices that matter.